You're listening to The Performance-Driven Warehouse, turning complex operational data into measurable performance. The modern warehouse looks nothing like what it did 20, 10, or even 5 years ago. Thanks to the speed of the markets, tech advances, and changing business processes, the warehouse itself has evolved into a complex network of people, systems, and automation. Balancing all of this to keep on top of volatility, disruptions, and even new opportunities is kind of an art form. Successful warehouse management depends on how well you can see everything that's happening across your network. And that network is powered by data. But what good is all the data in the world if it's not under the right lens and connected in a strategic way so you can understand and act on it? In order to gain the visibility to manage cost, performance, and capacity in real time, you need to unify your data. That's what today's warehouse performance management is all about. Hello, I'm Dan Keto. Welcome to the Performance-Driven Warehouse, where industry experts and operators share how they've transformed data complexity into operational clarity. Yeah, you just brought up a stakeholder I didn't think about, which I can't believe we haven't thought about this before, is the sales side. Because, as you know, we do very granular cost analytics on all the workflows that are going through the warehouse. And we've had some of our customers take our cost analysis sheets and give it to the sales groups to incorporate that when they're doing their bids for, product sales and such. But as you go through this process, having sales involved, because they may look at things differently than the finance team does, because they have specific things that they need to understand. So, however they're packaging their goods, do they price it into the good, or do they sit there and say, this is a delivery fee versus this is the cost of goods or whatever? But that's just something I actually left out in our model as far as like in this grander architecture of stakeholder alignment is that revenue side, because that they're part of this too. I mean, they've got to make sure they're selling it for a profit.
No, absolutely. But if you're a 3PL, that's critical. I've seen some people wanting to take some of the stuff that you do and figure out how to incorporate that into their sales, their CRM process, because today they're just doing a seat of the pants. And then 6 months down the road, they're figuring out we're losing our shirt because, what we estimate or how we did this. And no, it's not someone's bad. They might not have thought of something. So getting it up front. Because again, you don't want to have to say, well, we got to go re-implement this 6 months down the road because we didn't think about that one thing that we can't do.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing the beyond just the unified data model is the compression of data, timing of it. In other words, I can no longer wait a month to see my information. I need to see it as it's happening. If I'm an operator, I want to let my CFO know that, hey, workflow mixes have changed dramatically. Our cost structure is going to be much higher. I want them to know that as soon as possible versus, 30 days at the end of the month, you blew your budget. That's the name of the game now. I live next to an Amazon distribution center, and I swear I get paranoid when I order stuff, because if I click too early, I know if I wait a half an hour to cancel my order, the thing's already on their shipping dock ready to go. I mean, they're so real time in how they run things through those facilities. And so that's the gold standard for certain things. But the bottom line is this expectation is rippling through every single aspect of decision making, is compressing that as fast as possible and doing it as accurately as possible.
Well, the problem, I'll be honest,
you have just.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but WMS managers, again, it's very interesting. I did the Gartner Magic Quadrant for WMS for a number of years, and Manhattan's been perennially up in the leadership quadrant. And when I was talking to some folks, months back, is like, what are things that they've done? And one of the things that I think they did that had to give them credit is they saw the supervisory workforce as users. Most WMSs, the users are the person on the lift truck with a mobile device or someone that's picking or packing. The supervisors just get reports. Okay, well, now I can get it on my iPad instead of at my desktop. They don't really think about what are the things that the supervisory workforce needs to do, and what's the information they need to do a good job. I mean, today, a lot of supervisors still think, their job is to be a good expediter. I'm just here to solve problems. So they're very reactive. Problem comes up. Oh my God, we're not going to make, getting the Walmart order out, and then it's all hands on deck and they try to solve that. And that's the world's moving too fast. It's too complicated. You're too dependent on the skill and expertise of an individual. Not that you don't still want those people, but boy, if you give your really skilled people this information, they're just going to be superstars. But if you can make your average supervisor as good as, you're good by giving them information in your real time, because today, like you said, at best, I'm normally going, how'd I do yesterday? Well, that's okay to know, but that doesn't help me. And you talk to warehouse supervisors, they'll tell you, well, the problems I have today are going to be different than the problems I had yesterday. So what good is it? They'll come in.
Yeah, I'll give you a metaphorical comparison. So when we were, we evolved out of a 4PL with our technology, and we were running large cross-docking operations for distribution center for Walmart here in the Seattle area. And by liberating the information, so the associates, we didn't have handhelds back then. This is in the early 2000s. So it was, we did some manual reporting for the employees, but the associates basically every hour knew where they stood to their, on their production schedule. And they were very heavily incentivized with pay for performance. And what we found was amazing innovation came out of those individuals on the floor, because one, their pay was tied to how well they did. And so they were coming up with all sorts of creative ideas, and they were thinking ahead and not reacting, but being proactive to eliminate the downtime and eliminate these different things that happen. And, that's why we were able to take the KPIs from, I think, 73 cases an hour to over 200 cases an hour in the operation, doing the same unit volume and fraction of the labor with much higher pay. And so I think, to your point about getting this data going and having it communicated properly, with the right management structure, it's shocking how much domain knowledge is in those individuals who are doing this process daily. And then you can extrapolate that into a network where I can look at my Chicago operations that are just crushing it and extract what they're doing there and bring some of that knowledge through into Indianapolis or New York or wherever. And that's, again, this value going back to that unified data model is like going through this process. It is a lot of work, but the value you get out of it is exponential to the effort that goes into it. But you got to do it.
Yeah. And I think that this is where, I think that, as we talked long time ago, is one of the things that we saw leading in this direction before was we were seeing a paradigm shift in the way that warehouse operations viewed labor. It's not everybody, but if I go back, 10 years ago, most people viewed warehouse labor as a fungible asset. Hey, I could go to Home Depot parking lot and pick up people. And to be frank, they treated their people that way. Not the best companies, but the average companies, they treated their people, hey, I can replace you. So they use labor management, to say, okay, I've got 100 people. I'm going to look at my bottom 20% of my performance, jettison them and bring in some other people. What we've seen is with all the labor challenges people have was a paradigm shift that I think goes even beyond just labor now. Is they know, look, if I got 100 people, I want to figure out one is much better if I can figure out how to keep those 100 people than it is every year trying to find another 20 people or 30 people or 40 people. So leveraging this information, but also to say, hey, wouldn't it be better if I figured out how to make them better performer than to get rid of them? Because it might not be able to replace them. And so it's using the tools. And that's why we see this network effect much beyond, it's like, okay, I might have a warehouse with 25 people, but I have 10 of them. I could start to use these tools. Why is Chicago doing so much better? Wouldn't it be great if I've got 6 lower performers? Let's figure out what Chicago's doing. We can replicate that there and we go do some change management. Today, you're so dependent on the warehouse manager that they might not have any idea that, hey, someone's figured out something we could do that would be easy to adopt someplace else. So I think it really started with that paradigm shift. And then now some of the other things you've done, like I said, monetizing them, putting dollars around this, not just hours. Hours is valuable, but knowing the cost and some of that is even, it just adds additional value. So I think it makes it much more, I think we're going to see it expanded use now. Labor, you go to your average grocery warehouse, they've been using labor for 25 years, but they got warehouses with 500 people in them. And then now I think anybody can justify it.
Yeah, I agree with you. If you think about it, if you don't have that visibility into your operations, then you are highly reliant on those general managers and those operators who have that domain expertise, who can then guide the business. The problem we see constantly with our customer base is the incredible churn rate of warehouse leadership.
Yep.
I mean, it's shocking, how the turnover that occurs. And so that domain knowledge keeps walking out the door. So once you create a datafied operation, you can institutionalize that domain knowledge into your SOPs. So if you're still dealing with management churn, employee churn, it's much faster to get them up to speed.
Yep.
Because you have the measurement tools, where you can address, and you do the coaching, the observations, the things you need to do to make those associates, the best they can be. It is so interesting how the labor dynamics have changed over the 20 years. And I think that's where we have to get more into a technology-driven model to help people learn as fast as possible and guide them along that process. So I want to pivot a little bit, going back to, again, warehouse performance management. So let's make this assumption. So we've gone through the discussions of the challenges of building the unified data model. But, we do this a lot with our clients. Now, ours is more focused, we have certain things that we focus on within the Easy Metrics platform. We don't get into sales forecasts and those sorts of things, but within the operating side, we have a pretty comprehensive model that covers all of that. But what I want to talk about is the outcomes and results and capabilities that once you've built that unified data model for warehouse performance management, what are the things that you've seen? Because organizations that have been successful with this. What are you seeing as those outcomes that really turn them into best of class operations because they've gone through that process?
Well, I think it's going to start with just some of the basic operational metrics. Now, one of the challenges that goes back to the unified data model, and I was telling Dean, colleague, a story a while back. We were talking to a client a number of years ago that they had operations around the world, and they were trying to standardize on a common set of metrics so that they could look across all their warehouses and say we're measuring things the same in all these warehouses. And so their Argentine warehouse was their top performing warehouse. And if you ask most of the people, they go, we just don't buy it. We just don't, something's wrong. So they put a whole team together and they were coming up with here's our standard sets of operational metrics, and we're going to go out and standardize these. And they found out that when they finally went to Argentina, they were measuring the same metrics as other places, but they calculated it different. Now, it's not something nefarious that someone did on purpose, this is the way we calculate it, which is completely different than the way. So you get down to that. So I think that's where we'll start, but I think people get that. But it's getting away from just that, it's just saying, how many boxes did I ship yesterday? Okay, well, that's an interesting metric to know, but at the end of the day, what would really be nice to know is, well, I only shipped this many boxes, but I could have shipped this many, and I had this many that I didn't ship. What was my problem, so that I can figure out, well, geez, if I fix that, I can get 20% more volume out with the same head count. That's when it starts to become valuable. Today, what we give them is, this is how many boxes you shipped. And if someone says, well, gosh, we were unable to meet these demands, then the warehouse manager will spend the whole next day pulling a bunch of data together and throwing it into a spreadsheet, trying to figure out, well, what caused my problem. So that now being able to do some of that root cause analysis to dig down into that to say, am I fixing the right problem? Too often with labor in the past, it was always the employees just not working hard enough. And I love, yeah, you're not working hard enough. But I love the story. I was talking to some folks at Kronos a number of years ago. They were doing a time and attendance for one of our customers. They're telling me this funny story. They said they were doing a site visit for one of their clients. So, you get there early in the morning so you can walk around and see what's going on. So they're walking across the warehouse. They see this whole group of people walking across the warehouse towards them. So people walk and go by. And one of the guys asked the warehouse manager, goes, what was the deal with the parade? And they said, oh, well, they just clocked in. And they was going, well, where are they going? Well, they're going to lift trucks. And he's going, wait a second. They clocked in over there and they're walking all the way over there. How much time does that take? And they go, I don't know. We don't know. And so they said, well, let's look into that. What they found out, it was 15 minutes, 4 times a day. From the time they clocked in to the time they got in a lift truck in the morning, on average was about 15 minutes, clock out of lunch, clock back in, clock out at the end of the day. That was 1 hour of time. And this company was absolutely fixated on doing deep engineered labor standards. This is the classic, the forest through the trees. It's like, well, move the lift trucks or move the time clocks. You're going to save an hour a day, which is going to be more. And that's just such an obvious example. I think, it gets harder as companies actually fix some of those problems to say, okay, what's causing some of these problems? And, and so to do some of that, and I think, so that's, okay, I got the operational metrics, now being able to do some of the drill down and root cause analysis, try to identify, help people figure out what the problems are. Don't manually have to go pull the stuff from a bunch of reports and key it into a spreadsheet. And then I think at the end I mentioned this several times, is helping to monetize that, because we've seen a lot of people spending a lot of time fixing the wrong problem. That's not impacting our business much. Yeah, we do a lot of, if I'm shipping 1 million units and they're 50 cents each, and I have a problem with that, but I have some other, I'm Apple, right? I'm selling an AirTag and I'm selling an iPad. I want to, that's very obvious, but in other business, it's not as obvious. Hey, you got a problem, focus on where the iPads are, because that's having a much bigger problem on our business. And most companies just do not have that ability to do that, to really say, hey, from a business performance standpoint, here's some areas that, I could focus on, a lot more, put my time and effort into solving that. That's going to have much bigger. And I think what I think is cool is we're seeing the 3PLs driving some of this, because let's be honest, at the end of the day, that's their business. They are a service business, and you can make a brand. They're a very low margin service business. So small financial deviations can have a huge impact on profitability. But what we were seeing, before is that, hey, the 3PLs are doing that, but a lot of the brand owner companies are going, hey, I'm not selling my services, but all that information is also going to be valuable to me. And, am I running my business effectively? Am I cost effective? Or do I have some, like I said, why is this facility more expensive on a per unit ship than this other facility? Well, it's one thing if it's San Francisco, and I expect that to be the case, but we found a lot of companies go, wait a second, San Francisco's cost is actually less than Oklahoma. What's going on here? And then you dig in and you find out that, hey, they've really optimized something in the San Francisco warehouse because their costs are high. That, boy, if we could do that in Oklahoma, look what we could do. So I think that's kind of like peeling that onion.
Yeah, it is funny. When we first got into this space, we were really surprised that no one has gone through the monetization process of labor management. Labor management is very engineered, standard focused. So what is this employee score on picking or put away or whatever? And that's great, but that there's value in that. But once you monetize it, say, okay, what is my cost to do this, and where are all my cost pools? Because you'll find, originally people were just focusing on the WMS process optimization with the labor management system. They weren't looking at the totality of the hours. So you would have, all your efficiency gains in direct labor ended up getting pushed into indirect labor or missing time. And so your net savings was zero, but you showed really great performance scores in different processes. The other thing that we've noticed too is, again, these are the stories in the data, but we had a customer who had a huge workflow change. Instead of doing a lot of big construction builds and the products they were making, they were doing a bunch of remodels. And so the orders that were coming in for their product were a bunch of short, choppy orders, which are much more labor intensive versus their big volume orders. Well, they looked at their distribution costs as a price per square foot of their product. Well, if you're doing tons of short, choppy orders, your cost is going to go up through the roof. But yet, when you build a labor standard around it, it tells you that, hey, they're performing pretty well because it's more complex work and we're giving them more time on this. But that doesn't equate into the financial side. And so it goes back to these lenses which people see the business. And so part of this whole process when you do this is how to bring those stories forward and communicate that information, because there is so much information in that data. How do we bring that forward to people so they know what to focus on? And I always like to go back to the monetization. Show me where the big pots of money are. That's what I want to focus on. I've got $1 million sitting here of inefficiencies. Let's focus on that versus that extraneous process, which the score might be horrendous, but heck, it's only $10,000 of labor a year. I don't really care about that. Let's focus here. Where the engineers tend to sit there and go, oh my gosh, this process is inefficient. We got to fix it. And in time, you'll get to it, but let's focus where the money is.
Well, and it's, a good example to put something concrete is, and this could be one of those examples where you see site differences, is, you go, if you went into consumer goods 10 years ago, it was pallet in, pallet out business. I had, one client one time was looking at a WMS vendor and having me review the contract, and I'm looking at the contract, and it was one of the vendors that actually prices on a order line basis, not user. And I'm looking at it going, is there a zero missing? The number just did not look reasonable. So get on the phone with the client going, hey, I reviewed this, but I'm sorry, something doesn't look right. Is there a zero? And they go, no. And I go, wow, I mean, you're a huge company. It's a multi-billion-dollar. He says, Dwight, you got to understand something, for us, there are times when one line item is 3 tractor trailer loads of the same product, all pallet moves in and out. And they said, that's one order line, but they had a light, fluffy product that took up a lot of space. And I said, okay, well, you think about your unit. I was thinking you're doing is like, well, I could be looking in one place and all I'm doing case unit picks, but I haven't really looked at the pros and cons of implementing bulk picking. So I'm just going out and picking 1,000 cases a day. Well, if I do that just at how many cases, I did 1,000 cases. I compare that to bulk picking 1,000 cases, I did 1,000 cases. What it doesn't say is I went to that location and I had travel time and everything, individually pick 1,000 cases and say there was, just for simple math, 10 cases per pallet. Well, I moved 100 pallets versus 10, 1,000 cases. I'll see that in the cost differential that, yes, someone that's really, thinking about that might, but then they'll have to feel, well, what's the advantage of us doing that? And then someone has to go do a project for 3 months. But that's something that would say, wait a second, San Francisco implemented bulk picking last year and look at the efficiency they've gotten out of that. Well, let's go implement that in all of our facilities. And this is what we're going to say. That data has kind of been there, but it's never been in an accessible way. So it really goes back to you're really dependent on the quality of your supervisors. And then you got to figure out they've got to put the time. So they're working long hours. Same thing you'll see on OT versus temp labor. It's like, well, OT might be easier. I just have the same workforce and I pay them time and a half, but I might be able to get temp labor. We had one where, a client that had a huge, massive warehouse in the middle of a cornfield in the Midwest. And they were telling me a story years ago that they run out of men to work in their warehouse. Anybody that was someone going to drive 2 hours to work in the warehouse. So they were trying to bring in other type of labor, women, that, school age kids or high school kids. And, it caused some other problems. They ended up having to get a scheduling tool, but they finally said, well, gosh, we've been doing a lot of OT, but there's a lot of high school kids that would love to be making $15 an hour. They can go make $6 an hour at McDonald's and we'll pay them 15. That's still, half of what we pay one of our guys in overtime. And they spent a lot of time with spreadsheets figuring that out. Something like this would say, well, look, what if I had to add, 40 hours of, additional time? Well, that I could do that at this rate. I could do that at that rate. So that's where we go back to why I said performance management. You're getting this number of cases out the door, but it's like, how well am I doing? How efficient am I? How cost effective am I? I think that's giving more information to the supervisors to make smart decisions. So,
yeah, how we're looking at it now is, because for all of our clients, they have that foundational unified data model. So what we're doing is meeting with them because everyone is interested in AI. You're like, what can we do with it? So what we're doing is extracting these user stories. We call these investigations. So going to your overtime, what is that true cost of overtime? Okay, so we know it's 50% markup over your hourly wage, but guess what? I also have higher injury rates. I have higher turnover. And then I also have fatigue. I'm not going to be nearly as productive at 10 o'clock if I'm lumping all day, for 10 hours in, then I am at 1 hour in. So I get a degradation in production. So then from those data models, you can then abstract and say, if you would hire 2 more FTEs, this is what its true cost effect would be for your operation. They can figure that out, but it's hundreds of hours of grinding spreadsheets and doing this, where we can automate that process because those stories are in the data.
Yep.
And I really see, as organizations work through these data models, that's the next evolution. And is all these algorithms that run on top of the data, extracting and finding for them where those nuggets of value are, and then just bringing that right to the user. Now, you can't really tell them how to solve it because you can basically show them the where and the what. The how still requires that expertise of understanding your operation, saying, well, this may not apply exactly to us, but by highlighting it, monetizing it, calling attention to it, generally the decision can be made to fix it. And that's what we're trying to drive to customers versus having to go into the systems and look at the dashboards and really figure out what's happening. No, it's just being delivered to you on a silver platter. But, and I think all organizations are going to be evolving to this level, but that foundation goes back to the unified data model. If you do not have those layers in place, you're then dependent on your highly skilled operators to understand everything.
Well, and I think one of the yes, you're highly skilled, but I also think that oftentimes it's seat of the pants, and so I used to also cover robotics and automation at Gartner, and we would see people going into automation. They say, well, Dwight, if you were me, what would you do? And I said, are you doing labor management or something like easy metrics? And they go, well, why? I said, you're making decisions. I mean, some of these automation decisions are big bucks, and you don't know what, is that going to solve your problem? I mean, you can be talking tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in automation. Now, sure, you can go hire a consultant, and pardon if any consultants are listening to this podcast, I'm not trying to take work away, but they'll come out and do all that analysis. But to your point, they're going to be, spreadsheet monkeys collecting a lot of data, doing that at a point in time. Well, I said, geez, wouldn't it be great if you had this information? You could do the data and say, look, if I brought in 50 locust robots, and then that drove up my productivity, this is what the financial impact. Hey, that's awesome. But you ought to do that analysis before you go buy something like that, because you might get to the end of the day and go, and we just bought this and it's not delivering what we wanted. We saw that in particular in what we call the heavy payload transport robots, the autonomous lift trucks that they brought them in and they got to the end and go, it just didn't pay off. Well, you could have done the analysis and really said, well, hey, wait a second. It's just your travel time's not enough here to really justify, something that costs 5 times as much money. Go focus, your investment someplace else.
Yeah. Our kind of dream state goal as we build further into the automation data and so forth is to be able to go to any customer and say, okay, based on your workflow, your volumes, your profiles, here's what we recommend. We recommend looking into investing in these technologies because you should get a very good ROI on that. Because right now, any salesperson will come in and tell you, "Oh, you're getting this great ROI." But as you know, things always take twice as long, cost twice as much, and you never get exactly what you want out of it. So with our model, it's always real world data. We want to be able to really say, "Hey, this is something you should seriously look at slotting software. You should seriously look at a locus robotic system or something like that, because that is going to drive the ROI based off of your product profile and the workflow volumes that you're doing." And that's going to be.
I think if you get that, that'll be a home run. But even before that, is to be able to say, look, here's where you've got your highest costs and your volatility, and this could be a place to start looking. Then you could say, well, is it locus or is it high? I'm gonna solving two different problems with two different technologies. Well, then I can do that. But hey, if you can solve this, you could have a real impact on your business. Then if you guys can get it to the point where having that data, you go, we have some other algorithms that look, well, here's the performance improvement by using this technology. That'd be a major home run. So
going back to your point though, it really, we always say this to companies too. I mean, this actually was coined by Raymond, one of our partner companies, which is optimize before you automate. Really understand how everything is doing, get it running as efficient as possible. And then from there, that's your baseline to automate into.
Yep.
Otherwise, you could be leaving a ton of money on the table. So,
Dwight, we actually for the wrong thing. So,
we've seen companies do that, unfortunately, the wrong way. We've seen companies spin themselves out of business sometimes on these things, which is always a sad story. So listen, hey, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you so much for your time today. As always, it's an absolute pleasure talking with you. Someone with your experience and just broad-based understanding of this industry is it's a rare person to be able to share this information with. So I really appreciate your time and your insights. Well, as I've been in the industry too, it's coming on me as well.
Sounds great.
So you have a great day, and again, thanks for your time.
Thanks for letting me. I really appreciate it.
Subscribe to the Performance Driven Warehouse wherever you get your podcasts. For proven data strategies and guidance on warehouse performance management, visit easymetrics.com. Until next time, let data lead your performance and never stop improving. Keep turning complexity into performance.